We just saw the whole market narrative collapse in days and take Bitcoin with it into the air gap. Hi, everybody. This is Sina presenting our Bitcoin Intelligence Report 23. Today is Monday, August 4th, and we're going to review the report that's just about to be published together with this video. As you know, these videos are part of our premium videos that are accessible to our members. Okay, so let us take a look at our report. First, I want to mention that we did step into the air gap that we had highlighted last week. In that report, we basically said there exists a noticeable air gap between 104 and 114. So in this region, unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of accumulation happening, and as price gets close to that region, it was supposed to suck the market price down to that air gap, and the supply density is very thin there, and because of all the events that happened in the macro land and a barrage of negative data and negative surprises that we got in the in the reports that were published, Bitcoin corrected back down and stepped into that air gap. Okay, our report is titled Air Gapped, How the Narrative Collapsed in Days. Let's first look at our highlights. Macro slowdown beneath the surface. GDP data shows the economy is slowing down. Payroll data really shocked everybody. Consumers are pulling back. Fed is now cornered into a rate cut plus having to tolerate a new Trump nominee. On-chain air gap is revisited. Short-term holders are fragile. ETF flows have flipped negative. And we also see particular liquidity mechanics as Treasury is trying to safely manage the Treasury issuance, and China is stimulating. Okay, moving on. Last week flipped the market narrative on its head. The U.S. economy posted a strong-looking 3% GDP, but when you actually look beneath the surface, it's pretty weak, and it shows a slowdown as opposed to a strong economy. Then we looked at payroll data that really surprised. It has one of the sharpest downward revisions in a really long time, and consumer spending is down, and all that really shocked the markets. The markets were priced for perfection at near all-time highs, and suddenly all this bad data arrives, and the Fed is still signaling vaguely about rate cuts, and the market crashes like this. As all this happens, rate cut odds ramp up really rapidly. Okay, let's look at the GDP data in more depth. First, again, we see a 3% GDP report, which would have been great, except that it's primarily driven by the net exports, just because the companies are not importing now. The way GDP is calculated, if you import less for whatever reason, your GDP jumps, and tariffs are stopping companies from importing, and that has made GDP look much better. But to fix that, you can eliminate net exports, but if you do that, you also have to eliminate inventories that have been used instead of imports. So you drop both of them, and some people also drop the government spending, but it's too small, doesn't really matter. If you do that, we get a clean GDP metric that's only 1.1%. So an economy that's growing only 1%. Very slow. This is a terrible state to be in, not really good. And if you combine that with previous quarter, which we actually had a contraction on the headline, together the two quarters grew by 1.2%. So the first half of this year, 1.2%, and that compares to 2.5% last year. So essentially the economic growth has more than halved. Not really good. Then we get the payroll report, which is even worse. It shows a few terrible trends. One of them is that last month's job creation was very slow, only 73,000. So we generally like to see above 100K. And not only that, but the previous 2 months were also corrected heavily back down, massively corrected back down. That flipped them from really good reports to terrible reports. Pretty much the economy has not been creating many jobs. The average of the last 3 months is something like 45,000 jobs a month. And these are recessionary numbers, right? So if we actually had these numbers, real numbers a while back, Fed would have had a cut already. But now that the data comes in now, the next FOMC meeting would probably have to strongly react to that. We also get ISM manufacturing PMI data, which is also showing really consistent slowdown in the manufacturing sector, including many manufacturers planning to lower employment. And this is important because all this turmoil in the economy and tariffs were designed to help U.S. manufacturing, and these are the ones that are actually hurt more than the services sector. We also got spending data, which shows consumer spending only rose by 1.4% in the last quarter, and that follows another really weak report prior to that. And you compare 2025 numbers with 2024, you see that we actually got a substantial slowdown. Again, something like half. Like GDP is now cut in half, consumer spending is cut in half, and we are really getting the data that shows economies is slowing. Now you can begin to understand why markets suddenly reacted so negatively to all this. Okay, real consumer spending is down. And this is how the odds of a rate cut moved from 64% to about close to 95, 94%. Essentially almost certain that the Fed will have to cut. And Powell will probably has no choice. He has to continue. If we don't get a good data in between, we're going to get one more report about the labor market. And if that's kind of neutral or bad, then we're going to have cuts. And if that's the case, Powell has the backing from the data to begin dropping the rates, and it wouldn't look like he's bowing to President Trump. All right, so the next part is about Onchain Analysis. There's going to be a full video of this report recorded by Wizard, and he looks at a bunch of important on-chain metrics, including the revisiting of the air gap levels, and what are the potential areas that, if we reach, signifies the strength in the market and continued trend. He also looks at the short-term holder MVRV standard deviation bands, which we have been highlighting for quite some time, and URPD to understand where are the accumulation zones that the price might react to. Also, we look at the ETF flows, which have flipped negative, and he explains what that means and what's happening. In the monetary mechanics section, Renault is doing a much deeper dive into anything that impacts liquidity. Looks at the dollar index and dollar pendulum swinging back. He has been following very closely the dollar index, providing really good alpha there. And we also review the FOMC because it matters for this part of the report as well. Sorry. Then this is more detailed, the actual true inflation data that shows inflation is not picking up. This is fully consistent with what we have been saying about the effect of tariffs. They're going to be a shock to prices of some goods, but because consumers can't take them, it's going to quickly turn into economic slowdown. When that happens, you don't see any inflation, and instead you get recessionary numbers. So true inflation data actually shows that, and this has a good track record of predicting inflation trends. So as this is happening, inflation is down below 2%, way below 2%. Actually, this one reads 1.67. And economies is slowing rapidly, and we are about to get another example where the Fed is behind the curve and they're going to get, they're too late again, and they're going to get panicked and begin cutting a lot. But it all depends on how the data moves. Seems like we are getting very consistent data from everywhere that the economy is slowing, and the slowdown is not a slope. So my guess is this will continue. So let's see how that works. And Trump is again lashing out. The other important thing that Renault reviews is what's happening with Treasury. This is critically important. Definitely read this in more in detail. And Besant is following a very quiet and careful strategy to not spook the markets or not alarm anybody, but at the same time inject liquidity slowly through the duration management of Fed Treasury issuance. And then lastly, he mentions a very critical thing about China's stimulus plans. What China does really affects the global economy, so we have to keep an eye on that as well. And the report reviews their economic status and the stimulus, how much and with what impact they are injecting into their economy. All right, so with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you very much for your attention. Enjoy the report. This was about 28 pages, lots of details. We hope you like it. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.